This show, like all shows on Blogging Heads TV and Mini of Life TV, is produced by the Non-Zero Foundation. Please consider supporting us financially at patreon.com/nonzero foundation. Thanks.
Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
Hello, Laz. You're kind of cut off, Laz. You can't really see your face. Oh, hi, Simone.
Yay.
Everyone's here.
Yay.
It's three against one, Matt. So it's going to be a rough show for you. This is assuming my team stays unified. It's possible I might get some dissenters.
I'm used to being outnumbered, so it's all right.
Me too.
Okay. Well, fun while it lasted. Okay. How is your semi-quarantine week going? Is West Virginia even in quarantine right now? Or has Governor Justice let loose? Everyone can go wherever they want?
The governor has just instituted a mask policy as of about 24 hours ago.
Oh, wow.
That's a new thing. I don't think there's any enforcement mechanism, but you are now told to wear a mask indoors, which I think was a very good policy, and I completely endorse.
Is there been uptick in cases?
The part of West Virginia I'm in is relatively safe, but there has been a little uptick. There was a group of people who took a bus trip to Myrtle Beach and brought back COVID. That's not good. Otherwise, I think a lot of it is the typical kind of like nursing homes. I can tell you that schools are slated to start in mid-August, I believe. So we'll see how that goes.
Massachusetts is, we were one of the worst states. We've had a big decline. In fact, we has had our pediatrician recommend play dates because the case rate around where we are is so low. He said the risk is, essentially minimal at this point. The decisions on schools have not been made yet. I believe our school committee is making a decision very soon, but it's not clear where that's going to go. Because there still is the fear that as good as things may be in Massachusetts right now, you can look around the rest of the country now, doesn't mean you're in the clear forever. But as a state, I think we're in phase 3. There's outdoor dining. I think there can be indoor dining with certain parameters. And I don't know if that's going to work out for us. It's where we are.
Indoor. Part of the problem my family may have, to be honest with you, is because we're in a state that's fairly safe. And it hasn't surged like states like Texas that thought they were safe, and because we've got a lot of space, we've been able to play baseball outside at distancing. We've been able to, sit on our deck and basically eat meals outside, even go to restaurants and sit outside. What's going to happen when it's too cold for that? Our quality of life is going to potentially, unless there are some technological developments. Our quality of life, summer versus winter is going to be very stark. And so that's something winter is coming. Yeah. We're losing daylight as it is. So I'm already thinking that through.
And I don't know if this is exactly why things are happening as they are in the South, but there were some people thought, well, people will be outside and that'll be better. And did consider, hey, if you're in a really hot weather, you go inside where there's air conditioning.
Yeah.
That might not be helping you.
Some people do. Bill, I can tell you, my family, we took a little trip over the 4th. And we were, I literally ate every single meal outside. It was like 100 degrees. And I'm eating outside, not even nowhere close to anybody else. But there were people eating inside in the air conditioning, and I totally understand why. But for me, the calculated risk that I've sort of taken is outside, 6 feet away, outside is the way to go. Right. And so, I hope the science doesn't change their mind on that, a month from now. But that's been kind of my route. And sometimes it means it's 100 degrees out, and you're sweating while you're eating barbecue.
Now, you went to a little day trip with your family to Monticello, right?
Yeah, no, that's where we went. We actually stayed 2 nights in Charlottesville. And I did go inside Monticello wearing a mask, and they do it in waves. So they send in like 5 people at a time or something like that. And a family could go in. So like the 4 of us went in together and wearing masks. And then we went outside. They had this big tent. They had a lot of big tents up on the grounds. And we heard a Thomas Jefferson reenactor talk and take questions. And obviously, I think Monticello has been very upfront about talking about Sally Hemings and the story of slavery from day one. Not from day one.
Yeah,
but
I don't think it was always like that.
Not from day one. But this is not a post George Floyd
right
decision. They have long been doing that. So, and they continue to do that. And I think, I want the truth. I don't want a lionized version of Jefferson. I don't also want a demonized version. I want the truth. I did have to have a talk. I will say, I had to have a talk with my kids about Sally Hemings and about, because it's not just that, slavery is one conversation, but Sally Hemings introduces other things.
Right.
So we had to have that talk.
What I think is, they're young kids, obviously that's a whole other, challenge, but as a general matter, like the truth about Thomas Jefferson is interesting. Like you should want that whole story. Like, why leave really interesting parts out? And granted, we don't even know exactly the full story. I know Annette Gordon-Reed, who wrote one of the big books about their relationship, and forgive me if I'm remembering incorrectly, but my understanding is that she can't prove definitively, but believes that their relationship was essentially consensual.
Well, there is apparently when they were in France together, she could have stayed.
Right.
She could have said, and apparently she cut some sort of a deal.
Right. Like that we know.
Yeah.
But you might still argue she was still operating under a
Stockholm syndrome type
situation. Or thinking about her family.
Yeah.
Not operating from a place of pure free will, imbalanced power dynamic, all that kind of thing. So I'm not arguing. I'm not the expert on the subject.
Let's bring in the reenactor.
Right. But my point is, like, there's enough uncertainty. There's not enough documentation to know exactly what happened or what everyone's mindset was that makes it an interesting topic of debate and discussion.
Yeah. I should also say, on the way down, we listened to the Hamilton soundtrack,
now have you watched the movie on Disney+?
And we started, and so then after the tour, we watched. It's like 2 hours and 45 minutes long,
right?
But we watched maybe the first hour of it after. So we were kind of, reinforcing some of the things that we learned, and it's just, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say it's really well done.
I've never seen the show live. I've never listened to this. I was being kind of I was being very stubborn. I wouldn't listen to the soundtrack because I want to see the show.
Yeah.
And I resigned to the fact that I was never going to see the show.
Yeah.
But now I can at least see the film, and I want to, and I'm just trying to herd the cats internally so we can actually watch at some point.
Yeah. My only thought now is because we've all heard the soundtrack so many times because it's so good. And then when you watch the movie, it basically is just the soundtrack. I mean, there's facial expressions, there's dancing, but there's not really additional dialogue. And I think that if there were some additional dialogue between the songs, that would have been a great argument for you still have to go see it live. I would say I'm actually much less likely now to ever see it live because I've now seen the video and I've now heard it so many times. And so, but I can just imagine what it would have been like. I mean, look, so I remember there have been a few movies in my life where I just went to the movies just because I was a kid, and then it's Jurassic Park or it's Back to the Future, and you're like, or Die Hard. I went to see Die Hard at the theaters. I'm aging myself here, thinking it was just going to be another. I had no expectations, man. And you come out of there just like, we just redefined the action film genre for a generation, right? I mean, it just blew me away. And I could imagine what it would have been like for someone who hadn't heard the Hamilton musical, didn't know much about it, went in there cold and saw that. It would have just been amazing to be like.
That was my teenage 1980s childhood experience seeing Heathers.
What?
So going to Heathers thinking, I'm just going to see another teen movie.
Yeah.
And then, the Drano scene happens. I remember it was like the first weekend, and the whole audience was like you could hear a pin drop.
You probably, that's another one of the movies I don't think you could make today. I mean, you might make it as a niche film, but I don't think that you could make that movie today, right? Like in a post-Columbine type world.
Yeah, I think anything involving, death in school would be a much, much trickier pitch meeting.
Well, it was glamorizing killing. Now, granted, they were going after the popular kids who were kind of bullies themselves, right?
Well, but the whole movie was about. I mean, it was satirizing the glamorization. It wasn't trying to glamorize itself.
There's a fine line. There's a fine line.
Well, exactly. But that's why it was such a great movie, and especially when it was coming from a time and a place that it wasn't common to do that.
Yeah. I remember the scene where Christian Slater's like, nag, nag, nag. And he's got like this very sharp knife. And then I love my dead gay son, which is a great line, which you could never probably use today.
Right.
There's a scene where the preacher's talking about the influence of MTV video games, right. Just to show how out of touch adults were. Yeah, it's been a minute, but I was just saying, like, I've been watching the Bill Simmons Rewatchables thing, and he goes through movies. It's a podcast about movies that are rewatched, and one of the sections he always does is like casting what ifs, like who might have been in this movie and wasn't, and so surprisingly, like Christian Slater keeps coming up. Like he was up for a lot of movies, including Say Anything. I think the latest one I heard was Say Anything with John Cusack. Well, I believe, I could be wrong, but I think Christian Slater was one of the people up for that role. And there were a lot of them that he auditioned for. And it's just like Christian Slater could have had he could have had an even better career. I guess he missed out on a lot.
He did okay. He did okay for himself, though.
Do you remember Cuffs?
I do remember Cuffs. I don't think I saw
Cuffs.
I don't think I saw it. We could talk about 80s movies all day. And
I just saw another movie with Christian Slater and Fred Savage.
Wow.
Do you know this one? My son, who loves video games, found a movie from the 80s where these kids run away and they make it to like the Nintendo Championships in Las Vegas, I think it was, or maybe it's Reno. I forget what it's called, but it's okay. It's okay.
We probably should, talk about non-80s movies topics at some point.
I don't know, because the world is so depressing, Bill. Don't you think that we could be a safe haven where people will just tune in knowing we won't ever. And the joke could be, do you remember Jimmy Kimmel had a thing where like, we almost had Matt Damon. We just ran out of time. Like, we almost got to Trump. Next week, we get to Trump next week. I promise. My apologies to Matt Damon.
I don't know if you saw this New Yorker article comparing Starship Troopers to our politics today. And I love Starship Troopers. And I was super annoyed. Like, you could have paid me to write about Starship Troopers for the New Yorker. I would have probably given you a better piece too.
Did you pitch a Starship Troopers column to the New Yorker?
I would have thought that would be the most ridiculous pitch to give to the New Yorker of all places. Like maybe to Vulture, But I guess all of our standards are declining. The New Yorker will take anything now. I don't know if you recall, I did a big, 2,500 word piece to Politico back in January 2017 about the ABC miniseries America with a K.
Yeah.
Now that was work. I mean, watching Starship Troopers, that's not work. 14 hours of America is work. And then having to draw some relevance to today from it. That's a challenge. That's a writing challenge.
There's interesting stuff happening. I just heard somebody on a podcast say they're going back and watching The Jeffersons, 300 and some episodes. We have a watcher, a viewer of this show who has a podcast about All in the Family, where every episode is a different episode. So, I mean, there's a lot to be mined here, Bill.
I think as a child, I was genuinely confused for a while if when you have an interracial marriage, one child could be white and one child could be black, because that's what happened with the Willises.
It did, yeah.
Which, of course, is just, how that ever came to be is beyond me, because it's like it was secret knowledge what would happen. How that came about in the creative process, I have no idea. But as a kid, what do you know?
Yeah. They were groundbreaking, and I think that that family, as I recall, had lived in France previously. Am I misremembering this?
I don't remember that, but
the characters, I believe, had lived in France where race wasn't a big deal.
Right.
And then they came back, and so that was part of their storyline.
Well, these are all things, as you might point out, would never survive a pitch meeting today. And we seem to be
Archie Bunker, right? Could All in the Family, Archie Bunker, would be canceled. Like Norman Lear, who did that show, like to basically lampoon Archie Bunker. It's sort of like you said with Heathers, where it's like we're making fun of that sort of thing, I think didn't Spinal Tap say that they weren't being sexist, they were making fun of that sort of thing.
They're being sexy. What's wrong with being sexy?
Well, yeah, that was part of it too. That was the other. What's wrong with being sexy? But Norman Lear created All in the Family to make fun and lampoon Archie. But I don't think
I would argue
Archie today.
I would argue original All in the Family. Because definitely, the rough edges got sanded off over time. Original All in the Family was really satirizing left and right.
Sure.
I mean, Meathead, got kicked in the teeth, arguably similarly as Archie did.
Yeah. And by the way, Archie's the only one working. You ever notice that? The only guy working two jobs.
Yeah.
He's down at the docks during the day. He's driving a cab at night. Tough gig. And then he's got to support Meathead. Anyway, we won't go into that.
But I do think that the types of stuff that came out of Archie's mouth, like you could do a show that satirizes the politics inside people's families, and that does happen. But the degree of bigotry that comes out of Archie's mouth you could not get away with today, even in
What do you do
a
today?
different content. I mean, even you're seeing several shows removing episodes that involve blackface when this is more recent shows like 30 Rock.
Yeah.
When it wasn't blackface like in the early 20th century, meant to insult and make African Americans seem like buffoons. It was meant to satirize blackface.
It was meant to make fun of like racists or people who are out of touch or something, right?
But now, I think the most charitable way to look at it is this is too serious and hurtful a topic to even use as fodder for a joke, even if the intent of your joke is not to perpetuate racism. I mean, that's sort of the best way you can argue for that choice. But to the extent that people are worried about cancel culture, how much are you constraining the creative process if people have to second guess themselves before making what would be a pointed joke that has truly, with no ill intent?
I'm just tired of right wingers like Jimmy Kimmel and Sarah Silverman and Tina Fey and the aforementioned Bill Simmons. I'm tired of these right wingers pushing out their racist worldview, and I'm actually glad that we're shutting that stuff down.
So how do you feel, Matt? So there are two major instances of this topic that came up this past few days. One is the Tammy Duckworth interview, where she was asked about people wanting to tear down statues of George Washington, and she said, well, we need to listen to everybody before going off and making some sort of broader, inoffensive point. Which then got interpreted as Tammy Duckworth wants to listen to people who want to tear down George Washington. She has sympathies for people who want to tear down George Washington. And this letter signed by a whole range of people that was published in Harper's, warning against runaway cancel culture. Matt Iglesias from Vox was one of the people who signed the letter, and a transgender woman at Vox wrote a counter letter saying that the letter had too many anti-transgender rights people in the signatories to suggest that this letter was cover for legitimizing that view, and that it was wrong for Iglesias to be on the list of signatories, although she also was saying, I don't want Matt to be fired. I'm not arguing for that. But I feel less safe because he did.
I feel less safe. Can you imagine a scenario, Bill? And by the way, I could unpack each of these things.
What do you want to start, Tammy Duckworth or the letter?
Oh, man. Well, let me just say, I can't imagine ever. I've worked at many places, and I can't imagine, contacting my bosses and saying that, as a pro-lifer, the pro-abortion piece that someone wrote, by the way, as a pro-lifer and a former infant, a survivor, that something someone else wrote who's also paid to give opinions has made me feel unsafe. I can't imagine a scenario where I contact my bosses at any job I've ever had and I don't want this person fired, but I want you to know that they have written something. Number one, FY, heads up, someone that you employ wrote something. Number two, it makes me feel unsafe. Anyway.
Well, I don't, it's not clear to me. I mean, I'm just not paying close enough attention. I know she sent something internally, and she posted something on Twitter that said, I sent this internally, I'm taking out some paragraphs that relate to internal stuff. Yeah. So that's a little different than that's a little different than I went to my boss to get somebody in trouble. It seems like she shared something widely, to make a counterpoint with the clear caveat: do not punish this person for my opinion on the subject.
It seemed to me like if you want to make something public, you could just say, hey guys, one of my colleagues recently signed a letter. I just want to, let y'all know that I'm not down with that. I disagree. Like, this seemed to me to be like, I want to alert the people who pay you money. I want to inform and alert them that number one, that you've done this, and number two, that it makes me feel unsafe. Now, I don't know why it would make a person feel unsafe that Matt Iglesias signed a letter saying that we should have basically free speech and that we shouldn't be stifling, that we should be tolerant and we shouldn't be stifling diversity of opinion. Like, I don't get that.
Well, if someone was in your workplace that said evangelical Christianity is terrible, it's harmful, it's a source of wars, and we should be openly disdainful of this view,
that shit happens all the fucking time.
Well, I mean, and how
places I work,
how do you react to that?
I ignore it and keep writing stuff I want to write. That's how I react to it. I ignore it, keep cashing checks, and keep voicing my opinion on things that I believe in. I don't feel like, look, if you write at the Washington Post and George Will says something, that's George Will. Like, I don't feel like I need to, like, any place I worked at the Daily Caller. Do you think, we'll get to that in a minute. Do you think I agreed with everything the Daily Caller wrote? But do you think I also felt a need to, like, police it and, like, contact my boss and say, I would say, like, I've been given this amazing opportunity to voice my opinion and write what I believe in. That's what I'm going to do. And if other people have different opinions, that's called freedom. That's freedom of expression. Those are liberal values.
It's a harder subject once you incorporate the fact that there are people who are transgender who get assaulted or murdered.
Okay, but what about that letter had anything to do with the trans movement?
Well, this is where it gets complicated, and this is why my takeaway from this is don't sign letters. You have no obligation to sign a group letter. You can state your own opinion in your own words on your own platforms.
Yeah.
Once you sign on to a committee product, like, there's nothing in the text of the letter that has anything to do with transgender rights issues specifically. But there are signatories on the letter, like J.K. Rowling, who have repeatedly said critical things about transgender rights that made people say, hey, this letter is giving cover to people who are doing that.
Is it?
So now you have to now defend the interpretation of the letter, defend the other signatories on the letter. Why give yourself that headache? You don't have to do that to yourself.
All you have to defend is what the letter says. Okay, so here's where I'll plead ignorance. I'm not up to date on J.K. Rowling exactly. I've never read Harry Potter, and I don't exactly know what she said.
Well, it's not about Harry Potter. I mean, it's the stuff she's saying outside of Harry Potter on her Twitter feed and other online platforms.
I know nothing about what she has said, but my guess is that what people are calling anti-trans is not attacking. Like, my guess is most of these people are basically like, look, be whoever you want to be, do whatever you want to do, but leave me out of it. Don't make me use a pronoun that I don't want to use. But you be you, man. You do whatever you want. That's my guess.
No. Rowling has been making an argument that sort of, sex is sex, and people in the transgender rights community are trying to obliterate the notion of sex.
Okay.
And that is detrimental. So it's going to be, so she would say, you can do whatever you want to do, but you're promoting a theory of sex and gender, which I think is harmful to other people. And transgender folks are saying, well, you're saying is very harmful to me. Yeah, you're saying that what I am doesn't really exist, and that it has actual, hurtful consequences to individual people.
Hurtful. Let's get over the hurtful.
Well, there are people who get assaulted and die. I mean, it's not that is a real thing.
I think this is an interesting debate. J.K. Rowling may be right. She may be wrong. She's got a right to say it. She's got a right to think it. And so be it. I mean, like, I don't get the idea, like, number one, the idea of like canceling her, or you can't cancel her, she's too famous. But some people I think are beyond canceling, very few, but she's one of them. She's got a right to her opinion. Maybe she's right, maybe she's wrong, but I don't know what that has to do with the fact that Matt Iglesias signed a letter that was in defense of free speech and tolerance and diversity of opinion, right?
Well, only that now, because he hasn't really commented on the specifics of it. I think the Times did a story, and he didn't say anything beyond how he respects his fellow Vox employee who wrote the critical response. It's now just murky, what his attitude about the letter was, what he thought he was signing on to. Anything he says now is going to be complicated by the fact that he's responding to backlash. I just don't see what the letter actually accomplishes. Once, this is, in some ways, this is a very inside baseball kind of thing. This is a handful of people, mostly people who are media elites, not everybody on that list, but a lot of them, people who are not going to get canceled, who are not going to get fired, who can say whatever they want to say on their own platforms,
Sure, but in a way, isn't that, and I get the argument that's like, these elites, they're in no danger, and yet they're signing this letter. But, like, don't we need them fighting for us? Because I could get canceled someday. I need Noam Chomsky on that wall. You know what I'm saying? And there's a lot of people. There was a guy, Bill, it happened over the 4th. There was a guy who worked for Boeing who in, like, 1987 wrote an article against women in combat. And he got fired because he wrote a piece, 35 years ago advocating something that is our connectivity okay?
I hear you fine.
Okay.
I heard that little beep, but I hear you fine.
I did too. I heard the beep.
Yeah.
I heard the beep. Anyway, a guy apparently working at Boeing got fired for something he wrote 35 years ago that has now become, but at the time, I think, didn't Jim Webb, the former Democratic senator who beat George Allen, didn't Jim Webb oppose women in combat? It's become a very unpopular and politically incorrect statement. I don't even think the guy who works at Boeing still believes it, but apparently he was fired because this resurfaced.
Well, I heard that Joe Biden was once against busing, and look where he is today. So I think there are. You bring up an important point, though. There's a difference between what's happening in media circles, and I would argue yes, this person, that person has been fired. James Bennett lost his job at the New York Times.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of places even in the current media landscape where someone will pay you for what you have to say if you are good at how you say it.
Do you realize how tough this industry is getting, Bill?
Well,
I
am acutely aware of this fact. I'm not coming from a place where, like, I'm rolling in the dough from my political writing.
Okay.
I'm very aware that these are not things that anyone gets is entitled to receive.
This is a tough industry. It's gotten tougher. It's hard to make a living. I don't want to, other people have it hard, right? But it's become an increasingly competitive gig. And if you start throwing in quotas and you start throwing in, something you wrote 20 years ago obviously didn't age well, because nothing you wrote 20 years ago can possibly age well in a cultural revolution. And you start throwing in, whatever. I mean, at some point, like, taking other journalists down becomes a smart move if you're angling for a limited number of jobs.
But I think that is the point here. I mean, is to the extent that we're just talking about the media and not, I think there's the media question and there's people who are not in the media, just trying to do their others. The guy at Boeing, guy at the insurance company, like that's a different. That it's a different discussion. We should talk about it. The media is not a socialist enterprise. It is a for-profit business. No one has a constitutional entitlement to get to write a column for money. And a private media organization has the right to say, you said something or made a decision that makes your work not profitable for me, and I don't have to keep you on staff. So that's just the harsh reality of it. Now, and if you want to say something that is unpopular, I say things that are unpopular on Twitter all the time. To some extent, that can be a marketable trait. You're saying something that other people aren't willing to say. You try to say it in a good enough way that someone is willing to take a shot with you and pay you for that. But that's the business. Now that's different than if you're an airplane, if you're an aerospace engineer and speaking about politics is not your business and you're getting penalized for what you're saying on your own free time. That's a different discussion.
Well, this guy was probably, I don't know, I didn't read the whole story. I mean, the guy was probably like in the military 30 years ago or something when he wrote the piece about the military. And that was a long time ago. And now he works. But anyway, look, this is a business, but it's more than a business. Journalism serves a function in a healthy democracy. It's not just a business. It shouldn't be. And I think part of the problem that we have is it has become a business. Like it has become primarily a business, but it also serves a function. And I would be okay actually if things were judged in a free market, but it's really not. It's a minority of woke Twitter who get people canceled. It's not that people quit buying your newspaper because so-and-so has a byline there, right? But I do think that this is more than just a business. It is a calling. It serves a vital function. Part of that function is encouraging ideas and opinions and sometimes bad ideas and debates. The debates over sex, these things are healthy for a flourishing democracy. It's healthy.
But there are guardrails to it.
When this business starts shutting down disagreement and controversy, and it's essentially becoming a religion, right? Where like if you're an apostate, you're cast out. There are popes. I mean, the whole thing. I just think it goes against the ethos of what journalism should be about.
But you're not going to see most publications publish a Holocaust denial op-ed. You're not going to see people publish women shouldn't be in combat op-ed at this point in time, because these are things that are widely considered to be offensive and not productive to rich discourse. Things that will only validate hateful views that could get people hurt. So we're now having a debate over where is the guardrail in terms of other aspects of society. I mean, that's why this is a tricky conversation. But I do think there is precedent for people in the discourse to say, hey, this line is a line that shouldn't be crossed. And people have a right to try to make that argument.
Yeah, I guess I'm a liberal, which is to say that by and large, I am in favor of more disagreement, more conversation, more speech, more tolerance for the right to be wrong. I think these are human flourishing requires this. A healthy democracy requires this. And starting to police what you're allowed to think, what you're not allowed to think. And if you can be employed, if you have the wrong ideas about politics, about religion, about sex, then you aren't a good enough person to get a paycheck, not just in journalism, at an insurance company, let's say, or at Boeing. I think that's a problem.
But I would argue that in the internet age, we are not starving from a lack of speech and ideas. We have a cacophony of speech at this point. I mean, all the hateful things that we've been trying to stamp out are getting fresh life on the internet, for Pete's sake. So it's really not a question of anybody being unable to express a view. Let me give you one example here. As you know, I talked about on the last show that I thought people were not getting the Woodrow Wilson story correct. Woodrow Wilson did not support the KKK. Woodrow Wilson did defend partial segregation of the federal workforce. But the complexity of the story...
people should go back and watch. Right. You really dropped some knowledge on us. I won't
really get the whole thing here.
It was a good history lesson.
I tried to pitch that argument. I tried to pitch a story about how people were getting Wilson and the KKK wrong, and why that was a relevant point to understanding the decline in advocacy for racial equality during the Progressive era, because it was more about Wilson himself. People made the argument that Wilson was not a man of his time. I'm making an argument that he was more of a man of his time, and that has a larger relevance. I pitched that, I think, to 4 or 5 places. Couldn't get anyone to take it. No one wanted to pay me for that story.
Right.
I could talk about it with you on this show. I did a Twitter thread about it. Maybe that'd be a thread that risk getting me canceled. Maybe so. This guy believes.
That's my point.
But I'm not canceled. I just didn't get paid for that story.
No, you're not. We're not there yet. Let's say. Thankfully. What if a year from now, 5 years from now, the conversation that we had about Wilson, where you made a very valid and fact-driven point, where you brought the receipts, or your Twitter thread, whatever. What if that gets you fired and you basically are persona non grata as a writer because of that? Then would you agree with me that it's become a problem?
I have been fired. I have been fired. Not because of that. I won't call the organization.
We've all been fired.
What?
We've all been fired.
I worked for a progressive organization for a very long time. It got taken over by a different entity. This is when I was doing more freelance writing. And my new overlords said, we do not care. They didn't literally say this to me personally. But it was very clear to me through the grapevine what happened. I was a perfectly fine employee in good standing. And people I worked for suddenly were several more ticks to the left than what it had been in the past. I was running stuff about the 2016 primary that was not laudatory to Bernie Sanders. Lo and behold, all of a sudden my services are no longer wanted or needed. It was very clear I was fired because my political views, which I wasn't sharing at the organization, I was doing this on my own time. I wasn't bringing the organization's name into it. I wasn't associating my views with the organization. They said, we don't want this guy in our stead. And you know what? They had a right to do that. They had a right to say, this guy doesn't line up with us. We're in the politics business. His political views are not ours. Take a hike. Like my revenue is much less than it has been. I have actually taken a significant hit because of this fact, but it's on me.
You must think then that Christian schools could fire employees that don't line up with their Christian worldview as well, right?
I mean, I don't think this is actually a bit of a complicated question.
I know it is. That's why I asked.
I mean, as a general matter, if you are working for a charitable organization, you should not be fired for your sexual orientation. Now, I happen to know of a case in the 90s when San Francisco was debating this question. the Salvation Army was discriminatory in its hiring, but they were the only nonprofit that was doing services for HIV homeless people. The city wasn't doing it; the Salvation Army was doing it, and so San Francisco had to, not apply that standard to the Salvation Army because otherwise HIV homeless people were not going to get services. So it's a complicated question.
But do you think that an employer should be able to fire an employee who on their own time is doing something that they, advocating a worldview or a philosophy that they disagree with?
I think it's a general matter. No, I think it's a general matter. What you do on your own time is your business. Now, that's my view. Like if I was running a business, that's how I would run it.
But should it be a law? Like should it have been illegal for this nonprofit who has an agenda or nonprofit or whatever? I don't know what kind of group they were, but should it have been illegal for the group that fired you to do so? Because you were on your own time, off duty, you just happened to be advocating something that you believe in that's different from what they believe. But hey, so,
I think it's a different question when you're talking about a type of job that's not politics or media. So my political freelancing was still in the realm of the work that my employer was doing, and I was articulating views that my employers didn't share. So I think that's different than that's a different circumstance than, hey, you work for Catholic Charities, it's not even the Catholic Church, it's Catholic Charities, and you're born gay or transgender, should you be fired for doing charitable work? That's a different matter. And it's an even different matter. You're talking about working for Boeing or an insurance company when your political views are wholly disconnected.
Well, hey, I could really talk about this all day, but I do want to switch to the insurance guy because I have what is going on outside my window? I have a little story that I wanted to tell. So you probably saw this video, right, Bill? There was a guy. He's in some store.
In Costco.
He's not wearing it. Do you know what store it was?
It's Costco.
Costco. Penning at the Costco. He's not wearing a mask. Apparently, he had a disagreement with a woman. She probably said, you should be wearing a mask. But I think when the video starts, he's having a fight with a man. And they're telling him to wear a mask. And he is getting belligerent. He's saying that he feels unsafe, which I think is apparently a pretext to at least intimidate the other people that he's going to get physically violent with him, although he never does. Basically, the guy loses it. He's a complete jerk. And now he got fired. He worked at some insurance company, and he got fired for it. And I tweeted some concern about this trend of firing people for being a jerk off duty. And there was a lot of pushback that was interesting, and I wanted to share a story about myself. But before I do, Bill, what was your take on this whole incident?
Well, I don't love firing people in general. I think people in general deserve second chances, and it's not really evident to me that someone should get fired for what happens off the clock, barring extreme circumstances. But at the same time, a private business might say, you become a liability for me. People are not going to buy my product if they know you're associated with it. And
is that really plausible? Unless there's activists who unless activists and agitators really decide to make him an example, is it plausible that just organically people in the community are going to say, I'm not going to this agency?
I'm just saying a CEO or boss has the latitude to determine either I can't sell product as well if you're around, or you are making other employees uncomfortable and they're going to quit. People that I want to not quit are going to quit because you're still here. I have the right to fire you. Now, unless maybe conservatives want to come around to this viewpoint, they get behind more unionization that make it hard to fire people for those sorts of transgressions. I mean,
that's the irony, right? Is that the conservatives have, and somebody pointed this out on Twitter, I thought it was a very good point. Conservatives have pushed for this right to work mentality where you can quit for any reason and they could fire you for any reason. And so this is a reason. It may be a bad reason, but it's a reason. So conservatives, in a sense, this is part of that policy. We don't live in that world. We live in a world where unionization is weak. We live in a capitalist America. And this Unless
is true.
you're in the police. And if you're in the police, apparently it's very strong.
They have strong unions.
I know. And that's actually the problem, actually. I think the unions are a big problem with the police, but that's another topic. Okay, so when I tweeted this out, I got some interesting feedback, including the part about the right to work thing, which I thought was interesting. But a couple things occurred to me. One, David Foster Wallace did that amazing commencement speech many years ago. And one of the things he talks about is like you're sitting in traffic and someone in their gas guzzler SUV cuts you off. But what you don't know is like that person's not paying attention because his wife died of cancer that day or just got diagnosed with cancer that day or on their way to get the test. Like we don't know. So number one with this guy, we don't know what he's going through. Probably just a jerk. OK, but we don't actually know. The other thing is I lost my train of thought. I'm having one of those oops moments. Well, while I think about it, let me just tell you I know somebody said to me on Twitter, like if you were his boss, what would you do? And I think I would have a talk with him is what I would do. Now, maybe this guy has a long paper trail of abuses and maybe this is the third warning, right? And so, but he's not wearing a uniform. He's not holding a sign saying he works at he's not famous. He may be famous now, but he wasn't famous then. I mean, like he's off duty. I'm really big about the freedom and being able to do what you want without your company being involved in your private life. I'm worried that the one downside of telecommuting is going to be like constantly people being monitored by their companies. And that's part of what bothers me about this. But I remember somebody said to me, like, have you ever lost it like this? Have you ever lost it? And it reminded me of a story. In 2004, my dad died. And I went back, to Pennsylvania where he was living at the time, and I was making the funeral with my mom. My mom was in the hospital. She had a heart attack at that time, because of his death. And I'm dealing with all that. And I go into a pizzeria and I'm grief stricken. I'm sleep deprived. I'm in shock. I go into this pizzeria a place they probably went to actually in their town. And I go in and it's so stupid, Bill. It's such a stupid thing. But I go in and I order, like I want a slice of cheese pizza, a side salad, and a Diet Coke, because God knows the Diet Coke is going to help with the calories, right? And the woman behind the counter, it's a young lady, charges me like $7, and I pay it, And then as we're doing the transaction, I notice there's a sign behind the cash register, and it says, lunch special, 2 slices of pizza, a side salad, and a soda for $3.99. And I say to the woman, hey, I didn't see that sign. Would it be possible for me? Could I get that special? Like I get an extra piece of pizza and it's $3 cheaper. Is it possible that I could do that? And she says, I'm sorry, I can't go back and do it now. And here's where I was kind of a dick. I said, did it ever occur to you to tell me that I could have gotten the lunch special? And that was me being kind of a jerk, admittedly, okay? But then something happened that infuriated me. There was some guy, white knighting, some guy I hadn't even noticed who's in the pizza parlor sitting there, and he decides to be the white knight, and he's like, hey, man, the lady says to move on, like something like that, right? And Bill, I want to tell you, this wave of anger over $3 and a slice of pizza, a wave of anger swept over me, Bill, where I could have killed him. This is why I don't carry. You know what I'm saying? If at that moment I could have murdered that person. And I thank God got it together and just said, I'm never coming back here again. I didn't say that, but to myself, I said, I'm coming back here again, count to 10. I think I walked outside, threw the pizza away, and left. It was so stupid, but it wasn't about pizza, and it wasn't about $3, and it wasn't even about the guy who decided that it was any of his business, which it wasn't. It was because my mom was in the hospital and my dad had just died. And if someone had been videotaping that moment and I had lost it, they would have assumed that I was a really horrible person. And I'm not saying I'm a great person, but they would have been catching me. And now everyone has a phone, right? If you start doing something crazy, they will start videotaping you. That's just what I thought about today.
Well, and there's some really tough examples where a handful of students who have said racist things on social media are losing their college admissions. And some of them are saying, I said this a year ago and it was terrible and I shouldn't have said it, and I feel awful and that's not who I am. Should we be? And that's a pretty stiff punishment for a teenager.
Are they trying to create alt-righters? Because that's the most likely outcome is you're creating people who are.
But the hard other side of it is, if you're a private college, you are bringing somebody into your community, and you have a right to. You literally get to choose who comes, who doesn't. These are really not public colleges. Maybe it's a public college is a different question, but you have a right to say we want people of a certain kind of character in our community, and this shows that you're not of that character. So I don't think it's
I just want consistency. Either people who are in charge can discriminate against people based on things that they've said and things they believe, or we want a society where, by and large, and I realize, okay, the Holocaust, that's off limits, okay? But where people, by and large, can say what they want and be forgiven for past transgressions.
I think if we were a more forgiving society, tolerant society, give people the space to explain themselves, make corrections when appropriate, etc., I think that would really be a good thing. But I think we also have to acknowledge that private institutions get to make private decisions. Unless
do that?
Unless we have certain rules about discrimination. It gets complicated when you talk about religious institutions because they have First Amendment rights. That's a little complicated. But generally speaking, you can't racially discriminate. You can't discriminate on gender. As Neil Gorsuch has shown, that extends to people who are transgender. So those rules exist.
But if you say the wrong thing, believe the wrong thing, fair game.
Well, not under the law, because there is the First Amendment. You're not going to be put in jail for it. You're not going to be fined by the government for it. But unless you want to pass new, I'm not sure you could pass that legislation because that'd probably violate the First Amendment rights of the company. The way you would solve that problem is through union contracts that forbid that kind of firing. Teachers get that. That's what tenure is. So if you want to see more of that, that's the way to solve that problem, if that is your primary concern.
That's it. I think that's a valid and super interesting point. I mean, that's a think piece, Bill. Maybe that's your next pitch.
Quickly, we do want to get. I know we talked for a while. We do want to get to this. Tammy Duckworth.
Yes.
Did Tammy Duckworth hurt herself in Veep Stakes by responding to a question about taking down George Washington statues, that we should listen to everybody? Or did she defend herself ably in the aftermath? And should she be hurt in Veep Stakes for this one arguably minor transgression, politically speaking? Should this cast doubt on her ability to be a good choice politically and substantively in office?
I think Duckworth hurt her chances. I think she was always a long shot. But I think it gives Republican ad makers a chance to plausibly say that she wants to tear down Washington and Jefferson, and then she can explain the nuance. But they will be able to make an ad that plausibly makes that claim. And it goes against Joe Biden, the brilliance of his campaign, which has been making a distinction between Confederate generals and founding fathers, right? And finding a way to attack Trump, but also not alienate suburbanites and, college educated whites. And so I think that this undermines a lot of the brilliance and the shrewdness of Biden's campaign. And look, I think it was also just a missed opportunity for Duckworth. She could have, imagine if she had risen to the occasion and actually stood up and said no, as Emmanuel Macron said, no, we're not tearing down any statues. She could have made the point that we're not, when it comes to someone like Jefferson, we're not celebrating the bad things he did. We're celebrating the fact that he left a promissory note that said all men are created equal. And that is a promise that others have built on in order to help achieve civil rights. I think she could have elevated herself by standing up against this iconoclasm and really increased her odds of being the running mate. So I think she did herself a lot of harm in that interview.
I mean, I don't think the harm is that Republicans would be able to milk that one clip for the entirety of the general election campaign. I think the harm is, does Biden say to himself, is she ready for this kind of intense scrutiny? Can she handle these types of questions going forward? Because she hasn't had the experience of running for president before. She hasn't been bombarded with these kinds of questions and having to be agile in the face of that. I don't have to be in the position of doing, the cleanup work after the fact, for my VP. That you want to be able to trust your VP can handle these things on her own. So I think that is, I think that's going to be a demerit for her. And the way to handle that sort of question, as much as possible, is to start your answer with, as Joe Biden said, quote, quote, quote. That's the easy way to do it if you're trying to be VP. But it's not easy to handle. Look, I mean, you and I have a hard time talking about this stuff, and we're not running for anything because they're tricky concepts with some valid arguments on all sides. But if you don't walk, I don't have a hard time saying we shouldn't tear down Thomas Jefferson and George Washington now. That's very clear. Well, I mean, I'm with you on that point. I'm with what Joe Biden said on that point. But it is complicated politically by the fact that there are some people in the Democratic Party that feel differently. So you're running for high office as a Democrat. You got to do you're a big tent party. You got people with different opinions on these hot button divisive subjects. When do you just kind of stand your ground and say, look, I'm here and not there? Or when do you use gobbledygook to blur the issue? Duckworth went to the gobbledygook path. Let's listen to everybody. She wasn't trying to say, I want to tear the statue down. She was trying to artfully dodge the question. but that was something that was not going to be good enough in this circumstance. She hasn't gone through the process enough to know exactly, and you could be experienced and still get it wrong. I mean, it's not like Biden gets it right every time. It's not like the other folks get it right every time. But when you're auditioning for a part and people haven't seen you perform before, a little mistake's going to get blown up into it and be treated like a big mistake potentially. So that's why I think, she probably did not do herself a service in that answer.
My only regret with this whole conversation is that we didn't mention how the Washington Post wrote a story about a Halloween party that happened a few years ago where I think someone got fired for that too. It's a crazy world, Bill. You know what people could do to mitigate this? They could go to our Patreon pages. If people went to patreon.com/Bill Scher, they could make you immune to the mob that's coming for you as soon as this posts. As soon as they find out your beliefs about Woodrow Wilson, they could do that. And they could also then not only make you cancel-proof, they could also join our DM Zoom conversation, which, trust me, will be nowhere near as crazy as this, on Friday. So do that by all means.
All right, I know you got to run. I got to run. So for those who want to DM Zoom, are not on Patreon, sign up soon, and we'll talk to you Friday. Otherwise, we'll talk to you here next week in the DMZ.
All right, have a good one. See you guys.
Take care.